So, real quick, we can kind of talk about the basis of some socialist thought. um, as I kind of mentioned earlier, socialism kind of came about from, in a sense, since the very beginning, because as the old, at least in Europe, as the old feudal mercantile era ended and transitioned into this more industrial economy, people moved out of the rural areas into cities. That created an explosion in economic growth and scientific growth, philosophical growth, but also all of these new social problems that hadn't existed before because we didn't have wage jobs like we do today. These were all like new things that were occurring. So, these early philosophers and thinkers were starting to grapple with these ideas, these early socialist relations. So you had, philosophers like Kant in Germany, who talked about epistemology and like how you structure your thoughts, essentially, how you structure your knowledge in a way to better understand what's going on, which was kind of refined by, Hegel and Feuerbach. Excuse my German. And that got refined into, they talked about things like ethics, what modern ethics, especially around, the industrial economy and things like that. They talked about logic, how to think very clearly about ideas. That led to dialectical thinking, which is, in a summary, how you deal with contradictions. Because as society changed from rural to city, from agriculture to industrial and all of these contradictions kind of came up in society. And so there was a question of like, how do we deal with what seems to be a contradiction, right? In the way that things play off or against each other. And how can we think about it, and how can we use that to try to produce a better system and rethink our socialist social relations? So I know Chris is big on this stuff, so I'm going to hand it to Chris if you want to say stuff.
Yeah, I mean, Kant and Hegel in particular, Feuerbach as well, but they really focused on ideas, right? How do we think about things? How do we speak about things? How do we put ideas out there? In many ways, I see modern, Democrats taking on a lot of their characteristics, where they think that if we just make the right argument to, Republicans, to fascists, then they'll be convinced.
Yeah, right.
And Kant and Hegel especially were really convinced, and Marx grew up a young Hegelian, meeting in in coffee shops and debating ideas, and the idea that the person that won the debate was right, and therefore their opinion should be validated. But the reality of the actual world doesn't quite show that through. And then dialectics, to me, dialectics is a kind of a map of how society progresses.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So you like Garrett said, you've got competing ideas, and something will come out of them. And it's very rarely that one wins absolutely over the other.
Mm-hmm.
It's often a mixture of things that comes out, a new thing that comes out of the old. And you get into then Marx, which I think we'll probably hit on the next slide.
Yep.
Takes dialectics in a whole different direction, as do fellow Marxists.
Yeah, so might as well move on to that.
It kind of makes sense, right? That with this new, capitalist economy emerging, with this new capitalist system emerging, people had to think about it, right? They had to wrap their minds around it. The world was the transition from feudalism to capitalism was very drastic. And as such, people had to take a moment to think about it, to figure it out, to start laying the foundations for people who came, people like Marx who came, and Proudhon, who thought Marx was even still too stuck in ideas, but people who came later to say we've got this foundation of ideas, but ideas don't change the world, action does. right? And take a more materialistic rather than idealistic. And that's not materialism like we use it in modern sense, right? Materialism in the modern American vernacular is, someone who likes to have a lot of things. When we talk about materialism, under Marx and Marxism, what we're talking about is, addressing things as they exist in the real world, in the material world, not as they exist in the ideal world or in our minds.
Yeah, exactly.